Hi Otters, this is just me reading some more of Arsenic for Tea for you. We're getting quite near the end now. I'm going to be filming me reading the story for you every day. You can listen to it at the end of the day like we normally would, or anytime you'd like. Okay, so shall we begin? "Oh, it was dreadful," said Lady Hastings. She was lying on a sofa in the library, her head swaddled in a pillowy white bandage and one arm strapped to her chest. The rest of us were gathered around her like an audience. Before we were let out of the drawing room, we had managed to overhear Dr. Cooper talking to Uncle Felix in the hall. Apparently, it was a wonder that Lady Hastings wasn't more severely injured. "She must have hit her head on the banister as she went down," he said, rather crossly, as though Lady Hastings had no right to her good fortune. "She was concussed, and that made her go limp and roll. Most falling cases try to stop themselves, and that's when the damage is done. All I can find here is a fracture of the radius and extensive bruising. And the concussion, of course. She'll have to be watched closely. How did it happen?" "Carelessness," said Uncle Felix briefly. Lying again, I thought. He must surely know that this was no more an accident than Mr. Curtis's death. "My sister is a liability. Now, please, don't worry yourself. We shall take good care of her." "Oh, no," said Dr. Cooper. "She needs expert care, at least for tonight. I'll stay here at Fallingford and sit with her. None of us would forgive ourselves if anything happened to dear Lady Hastings, would we?" "Indeed not," said Uncle Felix blandly. "Thank you, Doctor. And have you had a chance to send off those samples yet?" "Not yet," Dr. Cooper replied. "As soon as the floods have gone, I shall assure you." "You've called the police for the body?" "They're on their way," said Uncle Felix, and again his voice gave nothing away. At last we were released and made straight for the library where Lady Hastings had been moved. As Daisy had said, we had to collect alibis as quickly as possible. But for a while we learned absolutely nothing of interest. It was very frustrating. All Lady Hastings did was complain very loudly about her headache. "Is there a cut on my forehead?" she asked anxiously. "Imagine if I'm scarred. Oh, and my arm! I might never play the piano again." "Don't talk, Lady Hastings," said Miss Alston. "Just rest." I flinched. Given what we had discovered about her, everything Miss Alston had said seemed menacing. Her presence in the room made my back hot, as though her eyes were on it. Did she know that we suspected her? Meanwhile, Daisy was watching the handbag like a mongoose after a snake. A few times I had to nudge her to stop her being so obvious. "She must put it down," she whispered in my ear. "She must." But Miss Alston never did. "How can I rest?" cried Lady Hastings. "The most dreadful things have happened to me. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it all over again. Those shadowy stares, the silence, and then those terrible hands shoving me in the back. So cruel. I remember thinking, this is the end. And then something hit my head and there was nothing more. I thought I had died." "Incredible," murmured Bertie, thinking while unconscious. "Do be quiet, thankless child," snapped his mother. "But what I want to know is, who was responsible for what happened to me?" "Oh, what do you mean?" twittered Aunt Saskia. "Exactly what I said. I was not attacked by a ghost now, was I? Someone did that to me. Someone in this house. Only imagine. What cruelty, what meanness. What have I ever done to deserve it?" "That," said Bertie, "is perhaps not a question you would like us to answer honestly." Lady Hastings ignored him. "I assure you, Margaret, I had nothing to do with it," said Aunt Saskia. Daisy sat up and poked me. Were we about to hear an alibi? "I was in my bedchamber. Reading a lovely book, when I heard your terrible scream. I rushed out of the room and met dear George, who was already on the landing. We rushed downstairs and saw Felix kneeling over your lifeless body. Or so I thought. Of course, I was dreadfully glad that it wasn't, truly lifeless after all. George, don't you remember?" She patted down the front of her dress, rearranging her scarves, and as she did so she gave off a waft of ghastly smell that made my nose wrinkle. Beneath her own sickly sweet bluebell scent was something else. Something dirty and unpleasant. I could almost taste it. Whatever could it be? Lord Hastings did a funny sort of wriggle. He said, yes, I must have done. I came out of my room, I saw you, yes, that's it. That's what happened. I saw Daisy give him a worried glance. What was he playing at this time? It sounded like another lie. I was also in my room, said Miss Alston, fetching a book for the girls' lesson. I ran out at once and saw no one else in the hall. And I was in the billiard room, said Uncle Felix shortly. I thought of something very odd then. If the servants had been in the kitchens, and everyone else had been in their own rooms, except for Uncle Felix, who had been down on the ground floor, or at least so he said, Stephen, up on the nursery floor, and Lady Hastings, who had been standing at the top of the stairs, about to be pushed off them by the murderer, then who had I heard walking above us while we were in the library, just before Lady Hastings screamed and fell? The room above the library was Mr. Curtis's, I realised now, and Mr. Curtis's room, we all knew, was locked. I felt a creepy sensation go up my back. I didn't believe in ghosts anymore, I told myself. I was far too grown up. But all the same. I imagined clicking open Mr. Curtis's door and creeping into that dark room. I wondered if it smelled. I wondered if the shadows were tall and creeping. I wondered whether Mr. Curtis's body was still lying on the bed. Yes, but that doesn't help me, said Lady Hastings crossly. We don't know who pushed me down the stairs. Until we do, I'm quite sure that I won't be able to sleep. Just think, they might come back. I demand a guard at all times. Dr. Cooper will be here, said Uncle Felix, and so will the rest of us. But if it was one of you who did this, shouted Lady Hastings, who else could it have been? I didn't hear the dogs bark, did you? There's been no one else in this house all weekend. Beanie, of course, burst into tears. Margaret, said Lord Hastings, looking at her awkwardly, the children. I think that some people ought to go upstairs, said Miss Alston, clearing her throat. I shall have your dinners brought up. But we want to stay with Mummy, said Daisy loudly. I grasped her hand and squeezed it. At that moment I could not decide what would be worse, being stuck upstairs in the dark nursery with Miss Alston next door, or being downstairs with Lady Hastings, knowing that the murderer might come back to finish her off at any moment. Don't be silly, Daisy dear, said Aunt Saskia, drawing herself up with her earrings jingling and wrapping her nasty flat-faced fur stole around her neck. Grown-ups know what's best for little people, and I confess I find myself quite tired as well. I shall take a little something from the kitchens and retire to my bedchamber, and I shall lock the door. The murderer shan't be able to get in. She spun about on her flat old lady heels. Her dress billowed out, and something fell tinkling out of it onto the floor. Quick as a flash, Daisy put her foot on it, and then stared up at the ceiling most innocently. Aunt Saskia froze. I could tell that she was desperate to bend down and snatch up whatever had fallen, though at the very same time she knew she mustn't. She paused in the doorway, twisting her fingers up into her scarves, and then the part of her that couldn't afford to make a fuss won. Oh, good night, she gasped, and trotted out into the hallway, shoulders all hunched up and hands clenched. It had obviously cost her to leave without whatever it was. I tingled all over with curiosity. Oh, I said, as though I had made an interesting discovery. My shoe is untied. I bent down, and under cover of fiddling with my left lace, I slid my hand next to Daisy's shoe. She wiggled it aside obligingly, and my fingers closed around something metal cold and knobbly. What it felt like was a key. There, I said, standing up there again and palming the key into the sleeve of my cardigan. Done. Daisy pinched me appreciatively. All right then, girls, said Miss Alston. Bed. Oh, Miss Alston, said Daisy, must we? You must, said Miss Alston, folding her arms across her chest. I shall be up in 10 minutes to make sure you have your nighties on. And if you do, then I will send Hetty up with dinner. Ordinarily, this would have been enough to cheer me up, but given the circumstances, it sounded most menacing. What if Miss Alston should slip something into the food? There had been one poisoning already, after all. I wanted to stay downstairs, in the light and warmth of the library, and I could tell the others did too. But with all the grown-ups watching us, we had no choice but to shuffle out of the room and upstairs. So I'll see you all tomorrow when I read the next instalment. Stay safe and be healthy. Bye.